Hey, welcome back to Lo Does Whatever, and we are in my craft room, which means that we are doing a sewing project today. This is the first Lolita Sewing vlog for this channel, and I'm actually really excited about it. As I mentioned in my intro video, I am someone who is new to dressing in Lolita fashion, although I've been an admirer of it for a long time. But as a plus size person, sometimes the options that we have as far as what we want to wear can be a little bit limited, especially when you're talking about like the big brand names. There are a lot of DIY roots in the Lolita fashion culture. A lot of people make their own stuffed bears to wear as bags. A lot of people make their own accessories. There are a lot of people who make their own JSKs because there are things like Gothic Lolita Bible, Otome no Sewing, and even more recently, Misako Aoki's book, sewing book, that help people with patterns that are standard in the style of Lolita dresses, one pieces, and accessories. These guides are super duper helpful in figuring out how to keep the silhouette of traditional Lolita clothing when making your own stuff to wear. But I often find that if you are not a master pattern drafter or someone who is really good at manipulating patterns, you might find as a plus size person that the sewing books are great at giving you silhouettes and guides to follow, but not great at giving you patterns that you can actually trace out and use. This is where the internet comes in. So one thing that I have noticed about a lot of Lolita skirt patterns, especially in Otome no Sewing when you're doing basic jumper skirts, is that the skirt is usually just a really long rectangle that you use a gathering stitch on to attach to a bodice, right? And the bodice changes depending on what kind of dress you're making. And luckily for me, there are a lot of patterns out there that have bodices that typically have princess seams, which are the kinds of seams you would find typically in Lolita jumper skirt patterns, in plus sizes. And I'm going to show you how I used one of those patterns that is also free to make a dress for a birthday thing that I decided to do. So this year I turned 33. By the time this video goes up, it will be probably March and my birthday has come and gone. But this year is the year that I knew that I was getting a hysterectomy. And so I decided that I was going to do all the fun things that I wanted to do and really celebrate myself for finally reaching a milestone in my personal life that I've been wanting for many, many years now. The reasons behind my hysterectomy and my health history, that's a whole nother video. But when I found out that my surgery was being scheduled for February 18th and my birthday is February 12th, I thought to myself, I want to do something fun. I had already decided that I wanted to do something where I could wear Lolita because it just makes me feel pretty and cute. Originally, I wanted to do like a tea party with friends, but that didn't really work out the way that I thought it would. Then I saw that the Paddington Bear movie, Paddington in Peru, was coming out. And I thought to myself, I want to go see it. And I decided that I was going to take myself on a self-date and go see the Paddington Bear movie, which came out on Valentine's Day. Now, what ended up happening is I did not end up going alone. My best friends also came to see the movie with me. We all got dressed up super cute, either in like Valentine's themed things, and I was in bear themed stuff because I'm extra. And they ended up throwing me a party after the movie, which was super sweet. And I was like, I love my friends. But how we got to Bear JSK is because of me wanting to go see this movie and get dressed up, because I love a themed thing. What is life but not a bunch of themes back to back to back to back, in my opinion. So I'm going to show you how I took the Mood Patterns Oleander dress pattern and used the bodice, modified it just a tiny bit to make myself a Lolita jumper skirt that is bear themed. Come on, let's go to the breakdown. Here is what you're going to need to do this project. You'll need the Oleander Dress Pattern by Mood Fabrics, which is free to download, your choice of fashion fabric, and notions as shown later in the video. So to start, I have cut out the 3 pieces of the Oleander pattern that I am using. Note that I'm not using the back of the bodice because I will be creating my own back bodice using shirring. I'm starting by making a mock-up just to see how it will fit. You should always make a mock-up because you don't want to cut your fashion fabric without knowing how these patterns fit, especially if they're digital patterns and you've downloaded them. After I did my fit test, I realized that I didn't like how steep the center front of the bust was going, so I decided that I was going to round that out a little bit, as well as add 1.5 inches to my bottom seams of all of the pieces so that I could extend it. Because if you notice, if you look at the Oleander pattern, it is a high waist cut, and while I do enjoy higher waists because of how I'm shaped, it was just a little bit too high for the cut that I wanted. In order for me to get that 1.5 inches extra, knowing that I had a 1/2 inch seam allowance that I needed to add, I added a total of 2 inches to each pattern piece. And as you can see here, all of the pattern pieces are finished. I will say you should still make a mock-up of your second draft. I did not do that. Also, don't forget to take your registration marks. Here is the fabric that I chose. I found the fabric on Amazon and the lace I got at Hobby Lobby, which I know. Don't judge me for shopping at Hobby Lobby. We're losing Joann's, so things are limited around here. I also have this gray fabric that I'm going to use as the lining for my bodice. My skirt is not going to be lined, but the gray will help stabilize it along with this fusible mid-weight interfacing. All of your pieces, including the center front bodice, the side bodice, and the side pieces, all need to have interfacing cut. The only part of the bodice that should not get interfacing is your back shirring panel. As far as how wide to make your shirring panel, that I can't really tell you because that's going to depend on your size. And it also depends on what pattern you're modifying. When I tried on my mock-up of the Oleander pattern that I modified, I found that I had an additional 6-inch gap to work with. And so I wanted to at least make sure that I got the 6 inches, and I added another 2 inches to that in order to give me a little bit more room so that when I put the elastic through here, it gives me some varying size so that I can still wear the dress even if my size changes. Editing low here. I definitely forgot to add the extra 1/2 inch seam allowance when I patterned this out. It won't be a problem, but I'll fix it later. So here's where I'm cutting out my back shirring panel and making sure that I have it so that the bear pattern will allow the bears to sit upright and not sideways, because the way that this fabric is, the pattern on the long edge goes horizontally. So here I'm just separating the 2 pieces. I only need 1 piece for that back shirring panel, so the other piece I'm going to use to make accessories. I am not using the strap pattern from the Oleander pattern. I'm actually just going to pattern out some straps that are 2 inches wide so that I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance on each side. And I'm just going to pattern out some rectangles and cut 4 of them, and that's how I'm going to do my straps. The pattern paper that I'm using is actually just 8.5 by 11 cardstock, so a lot of this stuff I'm patterning to cut on the fold because the cardstock just simply isn't long enough to make one long pattern piece the actual length of the strap that I need. But you know, that's what folds are for, right? In this case on the straps, I'm not really too concerned with which ways the bears are facing. So I can cut these in a more economic way and save myself some of the yardage of the strapping. Here I'm just planning out where I want to put the lace trim, which I'm going to sew in between the folds. So for our skirt panels, this is going to be a little bit more specific to your measurements exactly. So here's how I figure out what I'm doing with my skirt panels. So if I'm doing a 1-tier skirt panel, which is what we're doing on today's dress, this is actually one big ass rectangle, all right? And in order for this to get the kind of floof that I need and that I want, I usually take my waist measurement, which right now is a 42, and I multiply that times 3. So my panel is going to be 3 times my waist, and it's going to get gathered down to the total waist measurement of the bodice before shirring. That way we get the full stretch of it. So my whole waist measurement would be 126 inches. So that's how big my panel needs to be. Now, as we have figured out before, the way this fabric is printed is that the longest length of the yardage of the bolt would put me to where the panels would end up being sideways. So same way that I had to cut the shirring panel so that the bears are sitting the right way up, I'm going to have to measure out multiple panels and sew them into one large rectangle. Now, here's where that comes into a great thing for me. This becomes an advantage for me because I believe that dresses should have pockets. So with me having to do multiple panels in order to reach the full width of the skirt that I want so I get the fullness that I'm looking for, the fact that I have to do that means that it will be easier for me to add pockets. And pockets, I don't really have a pattern for that. The simple way to do it is just to take your hand and spread that thumb out a little bit, put it at an angle, or you can lay your phone down, because I believe that a pocket that can't fit a phone is a useless pocket. So I'm going to do that and cut out my panels. The width of this bolt, I believe, is 40 inches. So I'm going to need about 4 panels. And it's okay if it's a little fuller if I cut 4. My length is going to be around 27 inches because I still want to give myself a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can make your skirt longer or shorter, but typically in Lolita fashion, you want your skirt to be able to touch your knees at least, even with a petticoat on. So, or maybe just even a little bit above the knee. For the style of Lolita dress that we're going for. You can go longer if you want to. I just don't have any super long petticoats, so I'll be going with the standard length for me. Here, I'm just cutting out my skirt panels, making sure my pattern is the way I want. Just a little tidbit about pockets. Wherever your side seams are going to be on your skirt, I used to make the mistake a lot of putting my pockets too far up, meaning that when I went to go put my hands in my pockets, because my pockets were usually sitting right at my waistline, I'd be like, You want the pockets to be a little bit further down, and the measurement is going to vary depending on, you know, if you have a long torso, a shorter torso, if you how big your pockets are. For me, I have found that anywhere between 4 inches from the top of the seam line, your top edge, to 4.5 inches down from the seam line tend to be a good place for your pocket to start. You want to have that there. Me personally, I tend to be like 4.25, 4.5, just because if the pockets are too far up, you're gonna have a lot of difficulty finding them, and you don't want to be digging around trying to find your pockets. So just a little tidbit. All right, let's iron on some interfacing. I'm taking my fusible interfacing and I am attaching it to all of the pieces of the fashion fabric before I sew them together using the instructions that come with the fusible interfacing. I promise you, if you've never used it before, it's way more convenient than sew-on interfacing, but you do have to make sure that you get it at the right temperature and that you're using the right amount of water and steam in order for it to stick. But it goes a lot faster and is just as stable as sewable interfacing. Now it's time to sew together all of the pieces of the lining separately into the bodice. And once I've completed that, I will do the same to the fashion fabric so that I can attach them together. Here I'm working on my straps, so I'm sewing them right sides together with the lace in between so that I can flip them and the lace will poke out from the sides after I turn it. You can't see it here, but I'm going to press these as well as top stitch them. Now I'm going to clip the curves on both the lining and the fashion fabric to help make sewing it down a lot easier. I'll also be ironing in the seam allowances so that it's not puffy. Now I'm working on the shirring panel, and basically what I'm doing is I'm using the seam guide on the side of my machine to create 1/2 inch tunnels because my elastic is a little bit thinner than 1/2 inch. So I will be running those all the way down until I get about 1.5 inches from the bottom seam. And here is live footage of me losing the chicken game with my bobbin thread. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. In the end though, we get the panel finished and now it's ready for elastic. As you can see here, I had not yet added the extra seam allowance I needed. So now we're going to just take the fashion fabric and place it right sides together with my lining fabric and stick our straps in between. I am lining up the strap with the outside seam from the center front bodice, because I find that I don't want it too far off my shoulders. Because I did not elasticate these like maybe I should have, which just means just running a slightly smaller piece of elastic through so that it clings to the shoulders better. I still had a little bit of slippage with the strap, but it's something to note for next time. Just add a little bit of elastic so that it sticks to the shoulders a little better. I did want to make these adjustable, so in a way I did also kind of solve for the problem by adding buttonholes to the straps and a button to the back of the bodice. Now to clip everything in place and start sewing the linings and the straps together. Once that top edge is completely stitched, we will flip it right side out. Be sure not to sew the sides together because we're going to add our elasticated panel. And I'm going to top stitch and get rid of my loose threads here at the top of the bodice. Make sure you also press this before you top stitch because, as you can see, because of the thickness of the fabric plus the interfacing on the lining kind of jumps up over that edge there, so you're going to want to press that flat just to make sure that you get the lining to stay flat where it is and it doesn't come up over the bodice. And here's where we're at before we top stitch. I just wanted to take a look at the bodice and see where I wanted to place the small version of the lace that I had, and I think I do like it running from top to bottom like that. Okay, so a little bit of a note. I apologize for my shaking hands. So remember how we said we weren't going to forget about the 1/2 inch seam allowance? Well, we kind of did when it came to the back shirring panel. Now, this is not going to be an issue because simply all you're going to do is, because you see here that I had already folded up my 1/2 inch seam allowance and ironed it down. All we're going to do is just fold this up another 1/2 inch so that when I put the 1/2 inch seam allowance on the front and sides of my front piece, what do you call this again? Bodice. When I put the 1/2 inch seam allowance on the bodice so that I can tuck the top edge of the skirt in here, if I fold this up another 1/2 inch, making this a total total seam allowance of 1 inch, then everything will match and it'll be fine. This will also get tucked into the 1/2 inch seam allowance that is going to be on the sides once we insert elastic in all of the channels. And here we have an almost finished bodice. I have gone on ahead and attached the lace going all the way down and made sure that it fits in the seam allowance. I've also ironed all of my seam allowances to make adding the skirt to the bodice a lot easier. Here is the completed shirring panel. I did not get very good video of me making the shirring panel, but essentially you're going to take a safety pin and you're going to run elastic through each of the panels, however many you want. I did every other. And here is me adding the buttonholes to the straps. I added 2 buttonholes about 1/8 of an inch away from each other. Just to give me some flexibility as to where I wanted to put them. And then I used a seam ripper to open up that buttonhole. And always test your buttons just to make sure. If you didn't do a test run on the buttonhole, which I did not record, you definitely want to make sure that you test your buttons before moving on. Now we're sewing that elasticated shirring panel into the seam allowances on the sides of the bodice. Now, because I'm not adding a zipper, it's really important to make sure that you have the right measurements if you're not going to add a side zipper, because this dress is getting pulled straight over my head. So if I don't have enough elastication back there, it won't fit. Now to place my buttons, and the bodice part is complete. Moving on to the easiest but most time-consuming part of the entire process, which is hemming the skirt and attaching the skirt panels together. So I sewed up the side seams, and thankfully for me, for the most part, the side seams seem to line up with the selvage, so I didn't have to do any kind of French seams or anything like that to keep it from fraying. And now I'm just adding lace to the bottom, which also was tedious. And I had a close call, almost didn't have enough lace, but we made it work. Now this is both tedious and hard, and it took me forever to do. This is the double stitch line gathering method. It does create some really, really beautiful ruching, but you should take this in sections, especially since the skirt is so long. I find that dividing it up by panel instead of trying to run 2 straight stitches all the way across keeps me from breaking my threads and gives me a more even gather. So here's the finished gathering. And now I'm going to match my side seams and find my center points of both the skirt and the bodice so that I can make sure that I have enough room in the back to do the gathered shirring on the panel. So here I'm using those center points. I marked the centers of the front, the back, and both sides on both the skirt and the bodice, and I matched those pins together and then used those as guides to pin the rest of the skirt. You are going to want to make sure that you have a lot of pins going on in here. I think the next time that I make a JSK, I'm going to attempt to not have to gather all of this into seam allowances by simply using the seam allowance and using my serger to keep the ends and the edges from fraying. But this creates a very clean inside that doesn't have a serged edge. So all in all, I'm quite happy with all gathers tucked. This dress is complete and we can move to the reveal. I posted both of these videos to Instagram and to YouTube, and honestly, I just really love the way that this came out. And that is it for my first Lolita sewing vlog with the Love Bear JSK. I did make some accessories to go with it, some bows, and a really, really cute cross-stitch bear necklace that I made using a pattern that I found created by Stitch Mace on Etsy. You can check them out on their Etsy page. They have really, really cute designs for cross-stitch if you're into that. I find that cross-stitch jewelry and accessories tend to, in my opinion, be really good for Lolita as accessories because they're unique and give you the opportunity to kind of do something different with your cords. All in all, I really love the oleander pattern. I did not use the skirt pattern on oleander, obviously, because I wanted to achieve that Lolita silhouette. But the pattern itself is really easy to use, especially if you pick a fabric that is forgiving and you understand seam allowances. Once again, I want to repeat that the seam allowances are already on the pattern. So make sure that when you're cutting out your pieces, you understand where that seam allowance is. It's a 1/2 inch on most pieces, so be mindful of that. I did, as you guys saw, forget about the seam allowance being on my shirring panel. An easy mistake to fix, but just be mindful. I'm going to continue to use the oleander bodice to make more Lolita dresses. As a matter of fact, I have some really cute patterns. The original birthday dress that I wanted to do has like binoculars and opera glasses on it, and it's in a really cute cream colorway with wine and gray and gold, and that was what I was originally going to wear for my birthday, but I did not end up making that dress because, to be honest, making this dress took me a lot longer because it was my first time trying to film literally everything. I'm new to vlogging in general, so the mindset of, oh, you should probably film this, oh, you probably should film this, sometimes gets a little bit overwhelming. And so there were quite a few days break between when I started the project and when I thought I was going to finish it and when I actually finished it. Hey, what can I say? I'm learning. At any rate, thank you guys for watching. Put in the comments down below, are there any other patterns that you guys know of that are great for sewing Lolita that maybe were not originally created for that purpose? There are plenty of mood pattern fabrics that I think would fit this category, and there's another pattern on Etsy that's pretty popular that I think I'm gonna take that has more of a square line bust that I want to see if I can make a Lolita dress with, and it even has like ties at the shoulder. If you guys are into digital patterns, then you probably know which dress I'm talking about already. It's like $10, I think. Y'all know which dress I'm talking about, and there's actually a tutorial here on YouTube for how to sew that dress. But yeah, let me know down below in the comments if you have found other non-Lolita patterns to be helpful in drafting and designing your own Lolita clothing. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!